In the heart of winter's unyielding grasp, where the moon wept silver tears upon the frozen earth, Ceres fled into the night, her torn cloak whispering accusations of a life she could no longer bear. The wind clawed at her like the hands of ghosts, tearing through the thin fabric that had once been her mother's gift. A ragged shroud now stained with the chill of betrayal. Ceres's breath came in ragged bursts, fogging the air before her, each step a defiance against the weight of 20 winters spent in the shadow of cruelty. Her village lay behind her, a cluster of thatched hovels huddled against the encroaching pines, but it felt like a lifetime away, swallowed by the howling gale that carried the distant ooeves of wolves on its breath. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, sharp as shattered ice. "You are a curse, child, born under a blood moon to bring ruin." Ilara had always said it, her eyes narrowed like daggers, her hands raised not in prayer to the goddess, but in warding, as if Ceres were a blight upon the pack. The beatings had come with the storms, the words with every full moon, branding her an omega unfit for the warmth of the hearth. Last night, under the crimson eclipse that painted the sky like spilled blood, Ilara had driven her out with a final shove into the snow, her snarl a vow, "Go, and let the wild take what it deserves." Ceres stumbled, her bare feet numb against the icy path that wound through the whispering woods. The cold seeped into her bones, a relentless thief stealing the fire from her veins. She clutched the cloak tighter, its frayed edges brushing her skin like forgotten promises. No food, no kin, only the gnawing fear that had been her inheritance, fear of the dark, of the beasts that roamed these mountains, of the fate that seemed to mock her with every falling flake. The moon hung low, a watchful eye in the indigo vault, its light filtering through bare branches to cast elongated shadows that danced like specters on the snow. Why run? The question clawed at her thoughts, a quiet rebellion amid the storm. The pack had turned away long ago, whispering of her wrongness, how her presence soured the hunts, silenced the songs of the elders. But deeper still burned the shame of being the daughter who could not heal her mother's rage, who carried no gift but the burden of survival. Ceres pressed on, the wind whipping her dark hair across her face, stinging her cheeks raw. The road ahead blurred, the world tilting as exhaustion claimed its toll. Her legs buckled, and she fell to her knees in a drift, the snow swallowing her like a grave. The cold embraced her then, not cruel but indifferent, a vast white silence that muffled the world's fury. She curled into herself, the cloak her only shield, and closed her eyes against the moon's indifferent gaze. Visions flickered. Her mother's contorted face, the pack's averted eyes, the endless winters where she had hidden in the barn, lulling the restless horses with a touch that calmed their frenzy. A secret she had never named, a whisper of something more. Beasts quieted, nightmares fleeing at her nearness. But what use was it now, in this forsaken wild? Hoofbeats thrummed in the distance, growing louder, a rhythmic thunder against the wind's lament. Ceres lifted her head, heart pounding like a war drum. Lantern light pierced the gloom, swaying from a grand carriage that barreled down the path, its black lacquer gleaming under the moon like polished obsidian. Escorted by riders cloaked in gray, their mounts snorting plumes of steam, it was no common traveler's cart, but a vessel of shadowed nobility, iron-rimmed wheels churning the snow into slush. The lead rider reined in, his silhouette broad against the night, voice barking orders that cut through the gale. "Halt! There's a figure in the road!" The carriage slowed, doors creaking open with a groan like ancient bones. From within emerged a man, tall, cloaked in unrelieved black, his face half hidden by a hood that shadowed eyes like storm clouds. He moved with the deliberate grace of one burdened by unseen chains, his breath steady despite the frost. Ceres tried to rise, but her limbs betrayed her, trembling in the snow. Fear surged anew, not of the wolves, but of this stranger's gaze, piercing and unyielding. He approached, boots crunching softly, and knelt before her, close enough that she caught the scent of pine and iron mingled with something deeper. The faint tang of blood, fresh and metallic, as if the night itself had wounded him. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low, resonant, carrying the weight of command tempered by an undercurrent of weariness. His hand extended, gloved in leather worn from battles long past, not to seize, but to offer. "The storm will claim you if you stay." She recoiled, the cloak slipping from her shoulders, exposing the bruises that mapped her arms like dark constellations. Trust was a luxury she had never afforded, yet in his presence, the wind seemed to hush, the distant howls fading to a murmur. Her gift stirred unbidden, a warmth uncoiling in her chest, as if the very air bent to soothe her terror. He did not press, but waited. His eyes, gray as forged steel, holding hers with a patience that belied the king's crown hidden beneath his disguise. Thorn, Alpha King of the Northern Realms, traveled thus after the execution at dawn, a traitor's head rolling in the square, justice served, but faith fractured. The weight of that blood clung to him, a shadow deeper than the night, questioning if mercy had any place in a throne forged of fear. With a nod from him, the riders dismounted, wrapping her in a fur-lined blanket that smelled of hearth fires and distant halls. They lifted her gently into the carriage, the door sealing shut against the world. Inside, the space was a cocoon of velvet and polished wood, lit by a single lantern that cast golden flickers across his features. Saris huddled in the corner, watching him settle opposite, his posture rigid, yet his expression softening as the carriage lurched forward. The journey began in silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and the muffled storm. Thorn studied her, not with the hunger of a predator, but the quiet curiosity of one who had long forgotten peace. And in that shared quiet, as the moon trailed them like a silent witness, Saris felt the first fragile thread of something unnamed. Not safety, but the possibility of it, woven from the ruins of her exile. The carriage rocked onward through the veil of night, its wheels carving furrows in the snow, like veins pulsing with the earth's hidden life. Saris pressed against the velvet cushions, the fur blanket heavy across her lap, its warmth a foreign intruder against her chilled skin. The stranger sat opposite, his hooded form a silhouette etched by the lantern's amber glow, the light catching the sharp line of his jaw and the faint scar that traced his temple like a silver river frozen in time. She dared not meet his eyes fully, those storm-gray depths that seemed to pull at the frayed edges of her resolve, but she felt them on her, steady and unblinking, as if he were mapping the bruises blooming beneath her sleeves. The storm outside raged on, wind battering the panels with fists of ice, yet within this rolling sanctuary, a fragile hush reigned. Saris's breath steadied, the terror that had clawed her chest easing into something softer, unnameable. It was his presence, she realized dimly, the way the air around him carried not threat, but a quiet anchor, like the deep rumble of thunder retreating after the flash. Her fingers twisted in the blanket's edge, tracing the coarse weave, a remnant of some hunter's kill, its scent of musk and earth grounding her amid the sway. "You have a name?" His voice broke the silence, low and measured, like stones shifting in a riverbed. Not a demand, but an invitation, laced with the weariness of one who had asked such questions of the dying. She hesitated, the word catching in her throat, raw from the cold. Names were chains in her world, tethering her to Alara's scorn. "Saris," she whispered finally, the sound barely rising above the creak of harnesses. Her gaze flicked to his gloved hands, resting on his knees, strong, calloused, marked by faint ink stains that spoke of decrees sealed in wax and blood. "Saris," he repeated, as if tasting the syllables, letting them settle like snow on his tongue. I'm Thorn. No title, no flourish, just the name stripped bare, hanging between them like a shared secret. He shifted slightly, the movement stirring the air, and she caught again that metallic tang clinging to him. Not rust, but something vital, spilled and unabsolved. It stirred a memory. The village elders' tales of kings who bathed in crimson to forge their crowns, only to drown in its echoes. The carriage jolted over a rut, and Saris winced, her body protesting the sudden jar. Pain lanced through her side, a souvenir from Alara's last fury, but Thorn's hand shot out instinctively, steadying the lantern before it spilled. In that moment, their eyes locked, hers wide with wariness, his shadowed by something deeper, a fracture in the steel of his composure. "The road to the pass is treacherous tonight," he said, withdrawing his hand as if burned. "Wolves prowl closer than usual, drawn by the eclipse's pull. You've chosen a perilous flight." She swallowed, the admission bubbling up unbidden, fueled by the cocoon's deceptive safety. Flight implies choice. I was cast out, my mother. She saw ruin in me, a curse under the blood moon. The words tasted of ash, but speaking them aloud loosened their grip, like thawing ice revealing the stream beneath. Saris glanced at the window, where frost etched patterns like lunar runes, the moon's face a pale disk mocking her confession. Thorn's expression tightened, a flicker of recognition crossing his features, gone as swiftly as a shadow. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the lantern casting his face in half-light, revealing the hollows beneath his eyes, marks of sleepless vigils, perhaps, or judgments that lingered like ghosts. "Curses are forged by those who fear what they cannot control," he murmured, his voice threading through the dim space like smoke. "I've seen it in courts and camps alike. The moon doesn't curse, it reveals." Outside, a howl pierced the gale, closer now, a lone cry that multiplied into a chorus, echoing off the pines like accusations. The horses whinnied, their panic seeping through the walls, and the carriage slowed, the rider's shouts muffled but urgent. Saris's heart raced, the old fear surging, beasts that sensed her wrongness, drawn to devour what the pack had discarded. She curled tighter, breath shallow, but then it happened. The howls faltered, trailing into whimpers that faded into the wind. The air within grew still, as if her very exhale had woven a veil over the chaos. Thorn noticed, his brow furrowing as he listened. "They quiet," he said softly, almost to himself, his gaze returning to her with renewed intensity, as if soothed by a hand unseen. He did not press, but the curiosity in his eyes deepened, a spark amid the melancholy that clung to him like frost. In that shared silence, as the carriage pressed on, Saris felt the first stirrings of reciprocity. Not trust, but a tentative bridge across the void. He, too, carried wounds invisible, his posture a fortress against some inner storm, the blood's scent a testament to choices that haunted. Hours blurred, the storm's fury waning as dawn's gray promise edged the horizon. They spoke in fragments then, of the wood's whispers, the weight of exile, the moon's indifferent grace, each word a step from isolation toward entanglement. Thorn shared a waterskin, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange, sending a jolt through her like static from wool. No revulsion, only warmth, forbidden and fleeting. When the riders signaled a halt at a roadside inn shrouded in mist, its lanterns flickering like wary eyes, he rose, offering his hand once more. "Come, the pass ahead demands rest, and walls against what stalks the wild." Saris took it, her palm small against his, the contact lingering a beat too long. As they stepped into the biting air, the snow crunching underfoot, she glimpsed his profile against the paling sky, king in disguise, burdened by a justice that had cracked his soul. In his shadow, she found not safety, but the echo of her own hidden light stirring amid the ruins. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The inn's hearth fire spat embers like defiant stars against the encroaching dawn, its warmth a hesitant intruder in the frost-laced hall. Saris followed Thorn through the low-beamed door, the scent of damp wool and simmering stew wrapping around her like an ill-fitting embrace. The riders dispersed to the stables, their murmurs fading into the rhythm of brushing hooves and tightening straps, leaving her alone with him in the shadowed common room. Flickering torchlight danced across oaken tables scarred by countless fists and blades, casting long shadows that clawed at the walls like the fingers of forgotten grudges. She sank onto a bench, the fur blanket slipping from her shoulders, exhaustion pulling at her like the tide. Thorn moved with purpose, speaking low to the innkeeper, a grizzled beta with eyes like chipped flint, procuring a corner alcove shielded by a threadbare curtain. No questions asked, no coin flashed, his presence commanded silence, a subtle authority that bent the air without a word. He returned with a steaming bowl of broth and a heel of dark bread, placing them before her with a nod that felt almost gentle, stripped of expectation. "Eat," he said, settling across from her, his cloak draped over the bench like shed skin. The scar on his temple caught the fire's glow, a pale crescent that spoke of old wounds, not the fresh blood that still whispered from his hidden past. Saris lifted the spoon, the broth's heat blooming through her palms, chasing the numbness from her fingers. Each swallow grounded her, the salt and herbs a reminder of life persisting amid the cold. But her eyes strayed to the window, where the snow swirled in eddies, the moon's pale sickle lingering on the horizon like a half-remembered vow. "Why help me?" The question escaped her lips unbidden, raw and edged with the suspicion that had armored her for years. Trust was a blade turned inward in Alara's house, drawing blood with every tentative reach. Thorn's gaze met hers, steady as the hearth's core, but shadowed by something fractured, a king's burden, though she knew him only as a wanderer named for thorns. "Because the wild devours the forsaken," he replied, his voice a low timbre that resonated in her chest like the distant roll of avalanches. "And I've left enough to its mercy." He did not elaborate, but the weight in his words hung heavy, laced with the metallic echo of that morning's justice, the trader's final gasp under the axe, the crowd's roar turning to uneasy silence as Thorn's hand trembled on the hilt. Faith in his throne's iron code had cracked then, revealing the hollow beneath, power as a cage, not a crown. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a sharper note, not the storm's howl, but something primal, a chorus of snarls threading through the pines. Saris stiffened, the spoon clattering against the bowl. Wolves, emboldened by the eclipse's lingering pull, their eyes gleaming with hunger that mirrored her mother's disdain. The inn's dogs erupted in frenzy, chains rattling against the door, and the innkeeper cursed, barring the entrance with a heavy beam. Thorn rose fluidly, his hand drifting to the dagger at his belt, the blade's hilt worn smooth by decisions that scarred deeper than steel. "Stay here," he murmured, but she followed, drawn by the pull in her veins, that unnamed warmth uncoiling like a secret flame. The curtain parted to reveal chaos. Shadows lunging at the frosted panes, claws scraping wood, their forms hulking silhouettes under the moon's reluctant light. One rider burst in from the stables, face pale, a gash weeping red across his forearm. "They're not fleeing the storm, my lord. They circle like they've scented blood, ours, or something more." Thorn's jaw tightened. The disguise of commoner fraying as command etched his features. He nodded to the man, who pressed a cloth to the wound, the crimson bloom stark against the linen. Saris's breath caught. The blood's scent sharpened the air, stirring her gift unbidden. She stepped forward, hand outstretched toward the door, where the pack's leader, a massive brute with fur matted like storm clouds, slammed against the barrier, yellow eyes fixed on the crack of light. "Saris, no!" Thorn's warning was cut short as she placed her palm flat against the wood, the grain rough under her skin, cold seeping through like a lover's chill breath. The snarls faltered, one by one, dissolving into whines that trailed into the night. The pressure eased, the wolves retreating into the tree line, their forms melting into shadow as if called by an invisible thread. Silence fell, broken only by the fire's crackle and the innkeeper's ragged exhale. Thorn turned to her, his eyes searching, the storm-gray depths alight with questions he did not voice. "You calmed them, as you did in the carriage." Not accusation, but wonder, tempered by the melancholy that clung to him like frost on iron. He reached for her hand, turning it palm up, tracing the faint lines there with a thumb calloused from scepters and swords. The touch lingered, warm against her chilled skin, sending a tremor through her. Not fear, but recognition, a bridge forming from empathy's fragile span. In that moment, as the first gray light pierced the windows, Saris saw the fracture in him mirror her own. The king who ruled through fear, now touched by peace he could not command. "It's nothing I asked for," she whispered, withdrawing her hand, though the warmth echoed in her chest. "A quirk, like my mother's curse. It silences the beasts, but not the ones within." Her voice cracked. Alara's echoes rising, rejection as inheritance, the blood moon's mark a chain she could not break. Thorn's expression softened, the weight of his guilt surfacing in the lines around his mouth. "Strength isn't in silencing the storm, Saris. It's in facing it, choosing mercy when the blade demands blood." He glanced at the rider's bandaged arm, the red stain a reminder of his dawn's deed, and for the first time, doubt flickered in his gaze, not of her, but of the throne that demanded such prices. They shared the alcove then, words weaving through the quiet, tales of exiles past, the moon's revelations, the hidden fires that burned beneath frozen earth. Empathy bloomed, tentative as dawn, binding them against the wild's threats and the shadows of their histories. As the inn stirred with morning's reluctant stir, Thorn watched her sleep fitfully on the pallet he'd claimed for her, the torn cloak folded beside like a relic. Protection had become more than shelter. It was the choice to stand, wounds bared, in the face of what pursued them both, be it fang or fate. Yet in the recesses of his mind, the carriage's peace whispered of forbidden paths, where a king's law might yield to a deeper justice. The carriage resumed its northward trek as midday's pallid sun clawed through the overcast sky, casting a sterile light over the snow-choked pass. Saris stirred from her fitful rest at the inn, the pallet's straw still imprinted on her cheek like a faint map of vulnerability. Thorn had said little upon their departure, his nod to the riders a silent command that propelled them onward, the wolves' retreat lingering in the air like an unspoken omen. She sat beside him now, the velvet seat a reluctant throne, her torn cloak mended crudely with a strip from his own spare hood, its threads black as midnight, binding her rags to his shadow. The landscape unfolded in relentless whites and grays, pines bowing under ice like penitents before the goddess's altar. Saris's fingers traced the cloak's seam, the needle's work rough against her skin, a tactile echo of the night's revelations. Her gift had surfaced again, unbidden, silencing the pack's fury, not through force, but a whisper that uncoiled from her core, weaving calm through chaos. Yet it left her hollow, as if each use drained the hidden spring within, leaving echoes of Alara's scorn. A curse, not a crown. She glanced at Thorn, his profile etched against the window's frost, eyes distant as if consulting ghosts in the swirling flakes. The air within grew thick with unspoken weights, the metallic tang from his hidden past mingling with the faint, earthy scent of the horse's sweat seeping through the panels. "The castle lies beyond this ridge," he said at last, his voice a low rumble that stirred the silence like a stone into still water. Sanctuary, for those who seek it. But walls hold more than warmth. They guard secrets that bite deeper than fangs. His words carried the melancholy of one who had built such fortresses, only to find them prisons of duty and doubt. The execution's shadow clung to him still, the traitor's blood a stain no snow could wash, fracturing his belief in the justice that demanded it. Ceres nodded, her throat tight, the bruises on her arms throbbing faintly under the blanket's cover, a constellation of her mother's rage, now fading like ink in water. Sanctuary sounded like a myth, a tale for Omega's unbroken, not one who fled with fear as her only heirloom. Yet in his presence, the carriage's sway felt less like exile and more like a current pulling her toward unknown shores. The road steepened, wheels groaning against the incline, and a sudden jolt hurled them forward. The lead horse reared, its whinny a piercing cry that shattered the fragile peace, eyes rolling white with terror. Outside, the riders shouted, swords drawn as a cascade of boulders tumbled from the cliffside, dislodged by the thawing wind's insidious melt. Avalanche, nature's indifferent wrath, burying paths in white death. The carriage skidded, tilting perilously, and Ceres's hand flew to the door as panic surged, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Thorn lunged, bracing her against him, his arm a iron band across her waist, the heat of him searing through layers of wool and resolve. "Hold," he commanded, not to her, but to the storm itself, his free hand gripping the latch as the world tilted. But the chaos deepened. From the tree line burst a shadow, not rock but beast, a rogue bear, massive and scarred, its fur matted with frost and old wounds. Drawn by the eclipse's lingering madness, it charged the escort, roaring a bellow that drowned the rider's cries, claws raking the snow into bloody furrows as it felled a mount. The horse screamed, collapsing in a tangle of limbs, its rider thrown clear but pinned beneath the thrashing bulk. Blood sprayed, hot and coppery, scenting the air like an accusation, and Ceres's vision blurred with the visceral red against pristine white. Terror locked her muscles, Elara's voice hissing in her mind. Curse, ruin, forsaken. The bear's eyes locked on the carriage, nostrils flaring at the promise of warm flesh within. Thorn shifted, drawing his dagger with a fluid grace born of battlefields, positioning himself between her and the fray. "Stay down," he growled, the king's fire igniting in his gaze, but beneath it flickered the fracture, the man who questioned if more blood would mend his soul. The door splintered under a probing paw, wood cracking like bones, and the beast's hot breath fogged the breach, its growl vibrating through her bones. In that suspended breath, Ceres's gift erupted, not as a trickle, but a flood. It poured from her like moonlight spilling over a shadowed veil, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the splintered frame. No words, no incantation, only the deep well within, stirred by the blood's call and the peril's edge. The bear froze, its roar fracturing into a bewildered huff, eyes glazing as if beholding a vision from the goddess's dream. The chaos rippled outward. The fallen horse stilled its thrashing, the riders' panicked mounts quieted to trembling halts, even the tumbling stones seemed to slow, settling with muffled thuds. Nightmares banished, howls silenced, not by blade, but by the serene veil she wove, her presence a balm that touched the wild's frayed edges. Thorn stared, dagger forgotten in his grip, as the bear backed away, not in fear but resignation, vanishing into the pines like a specter reclaimed by the mist. The riders regrouped, hauling their wounded comrade free, his gashes already clotting under the unnatural calm. Ceres slumped against the seat, drained, her skin pale as the snow, the effort carving hollows in her cheeks. The warmth of her gift lingered, a faint glow in her veins, but it came at a cost, the revelation of her depth exposed like a vein laid bare. He turned to her then, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness that belied the calluses of command, thumb brushing a tear she hadn't known had fallen. Storm-gray eyes widened, not with awe but a dawning certainty, as if the moon had unveiled a prophecy long obscured. "You are the Pathfinder," he whispered, the words laced with reverence and dread, his voice cracking like ice under pressure. Legends whispered of such omegas, bearers of the goddess's hidden light, who calm the beasts of earth and mind, key to unlocking destinies chained by guilt and blood. Thorn's own nightmares, born of the throne's merciless decrees, had plagued him since the execution, visions of crimson moons and fallen realms, where justice twisted to tyranny. In her, he saw the salve, the one who could silence the inner storms that threatened his rule, revealing a path to redemption not through conquest, but compassion. "You carry the moon's grace," he continued, his touch lingering, a bridge from protector to seeker. "I've sought such a sign through wars and oracles, believing it myth, but you banish the shadows that devour kings." His confession hung between them, raw as the blood staining the snow outside, the weight of his realization shifting the air. Saris recoiled slightly, the title a chain heavier than Alara's curses, yet in his gaze burned not possession, but hope, a king's destiny entwined with her fragile light, demanding choices neither had foreseen. As the carriage righted and pressed on, the pass yielding to the castle's distant spires, piercing the horizon like frozen spears, Saris felt the pull of revelation's tide. Her gift was no quirk, but a key to his fractured soul, perhaps to her own rebirth. The torn cloak at her feet seemed to pulse with new meaning, its threads now woven with lunar silver, symbol of paths untrodden. Yet doubt gnawed. Could peace mend what blood had wrought, or would it demand a price steeper than exile? Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the castle's spires clawed at the twilight sky like the frozen fingers of ancient gods. Their ice-glazed stone whispering secrets to the wind that howled through the outer wards. Saris stepped from the carriage, her legs unsteady on the packed snow of the courtyard, the torn cloak, now mended with Thorn's dark thread, clinging to her like a second skin, its edges frayed by the journey's trials. The air bit sharp, carrying the metallic tang of forges below, and the faint, acrid smoke of torches lining the battlements. Guards in steel-gray armor snapped to attention as Thorn descended behind her, his hand brushing her elbow, a fleeting anchor amid the rising clamor of arrival. He had shed the hood in the pass's aftermath, revealing the king's mantle woven into his very bearing, broad shoulders etched with the weight of realms, eyes like forged tempests holding the court's gaze. Whispers rippled through the assembled betas and warriors, their breaths clouding in the chill as recognition dawned. "The Alpha King returns," one murmured, the words threading fear and reverence like veins through marble. Saris's pulse thundered, the revelation crashing over her like an avalanche's echo. She had entered not a sanctuary, but the heart of power's forge, where her gift might be claimed as tool or threat. Thorn led her through arched gates that groaned on iron hinges, the courtyard's torches flaring to life, casting crimson pools on the snow that mirrored the blood moon's lingering stain. Servants bowed low, their eyes darting to her rags, curiosity sharpening to suspicion. In the great hall, vaulted ceilings soared like the ribs of a colossal beast, tapestries of lunar hunts and fallen foes draping the walls in faded golds and blues. A fire roared in the hearth, its flames devouring logs with hungry snaps, but the warmth failed to reach her core. Instead, it illuminated the faces turned toward them, nobles in fur-trimmed robes, their gazes appraising, laced with the court's subtle poisons. At the high table stood a figure Saris knew from village tales, Lord Garrick, Thorn's beta advisor and rumored rival, his frame lean as a blade, eyes black as raven wings. Beside him, a delegation from the southern packs, rough-hewn alphas with pelts scarred by border skirmishes, their scents thick with pine and aggression. And there, in the shadowed alcove, a face that twisted her gut like a knife, Ilara, her mother, flanked by 2 pack enforcers from the Whispering Woods. How? The journey's blur offered no answer, but Ilara's snarl cut through the din, her voice a whip crack. There she is, the curse I birthed, skulking into the king's lair like a thief in the night. Saris froze, the hall's murmurs swelling to a tide. Ilara's eyes, narrowed to slits, raked over her, the same daggers that had carved bruises into her childhood. You fled your place, girl. The pack demands your return, for the ruin you've sown. The blood moon marked you, and now the hunts fail, the elders sicken. You're no Omega for a throne, your chattel to be broken or culled. The words landed like blows, stirring the old shame. The fear that her gift was but a veil over the blight Ilara proclaimed. The southern alphas shifted, their growls low, sensing opportunity in the fracture, Garrick's lips curling in a smile that promised betrayal, his hand resting on a hilt as if weighing alliances against the king. Thorn's hand tightened on her arm, pulling her to his side, his body a shield of unyielding heat against the hall's chill. "She is under my protection," he declared, voice resonating like thunder rolling through mountain passes, silencing the room. The fire's glow caught the scar on his temple, a silver reminder of battles where mercy had been a stranger. But beneath his command flickered the guilt from the execution, the traitor's blood, now echoed in this confrontation, where his past as iron ruler clashed with the peace she had gifted him. Garrick stepped forward, his tone oily as melting snow. "Protection for a runaway Omega, my king? The pack's murmur of weakness. This. Pathfinder, as whispers claim, could be a southern ploy, or worse, the curse that unravels us all. Forgive the past, or wage war on those who question your justice?" The hall tensed, breaths held like drawn bows. Saris's gift stirred unbidden, a warm current against the rising snarls, but it faltered under Ilara's glare, the woman who had birthed her into rejection, now demanding chains in the name of pack law. Freedom beckoned in flight, slipping these walls before her light became a pawn in royal games, before love's fragile thread snapped under duty's weight. Yet staying meant facing the beast within, forgiving Ilara's rage, not as absolution, but as the first step in claiming her path. War loomed in the Alpha's eyes, borders aflame with old grudges, Thorn's throne teetering on the edge of his doubt. Could compassion crown him, or would it demand blood anew? "You speak of curses," Saris said, her voice emerging steady, threaded with the moon's quiet steel, surprising even herself. She stepped forward, the torn cloak pooling like spilled ink at her feet, its mended seam a symbol of bonds reforged. "But I've silenced storms you fear, beasts, nightmares, the wild's fury. Not for power, but because the goddess reveals what fear blinds." Ilara lunged, enforcers at her heels. But Thorn's guards intercepted, swords hissing free. The clash echoed, a spark to tinder. Southern alphas drew blades, Garrick's betrayal unveiled in his feigned shock, cries of "treason!" mingling with howls that shook the rafters. In the melee, Saris met Thorn's gaze across the fray, his dagger flashing to parry a strike, blood blooming on a traitor's sleeve, the metallic scent thick as memory. Love was no impulse here, but a choice. Flee into the night, reclaiming solitude's bitter liberty, or stand, weaving her gift through the chaos to calm the human beasts, forgiving the past to forge a new law. Her hand extended toward Ilara, not in strike, but plea, the air humming with unspoken potential, mercy as weapon or war as escape. The fire roared higher, shadows dancing like specters of decision, the moon's light piercing the high windows to bathe the hall in silver judgment. What was redemption? if not choosing the wound that healed. The hall erupted in a symphony of steel and snarls, the clash of blades ringing like the goddess's fractured judgment under the moon's unyielding gaze. Saris stood frozen amid the fray, her extended hand trembling in the space between plea and peril, the torn cloak at her feet a crumpled banner of her fractured lineage. Ilara's enforcers surged forward, their forms hulking shadows etched by torchlight, muscles coiling like storm winds ready to unleash. But Thorn was there, a whirlwind of controlled fury, his dagger a silver arc that parried the first strike, sending the attacker staggering back with a spray of blood that arced hot and viscous across the flagstones. The metallic scent bloomed thick, mingling with the hearth's acrid smoke, stirring Saris's gut like a warning from the wild itself. "Foolish child!" Ilara spat, her voice slicing through the din, raw with the bitterness of years unhealed. She wrenched free from a guard's grasp, her nails raking the air toward Saris's face, eyes blazing with the same fanatic light that had branded her daughter a curse. "You think this king's pity mends what the blood moon wrought? You're no savior. You're the blight that sours our hunts, the whisper that drives beasts mad." The words landed like barbs, reopening wounds Saris had thought the journey's fragile peace had begun to seal. Freedom flickered in her mind's eye. The outer gates, the snow-swept wild calling her back to solitude, where no throne could claim her light as tribute, no mother could chain her to shame. Yet Thorn's roar cut the chaos, a primal command that rippled through the hall like thunder echoing off cavern walls. "Enough!" He pivoted, his body a barrier between her and the enforcers, the scar on his temple gleaming silver in the fire's glow, a testament to battles where mercy had been sacrificed on duty's altar. Blood trickled from a shallow cut on his forearm, warm droplets pattering onto the stone, each one an echo of the execution that haunted him, the traitor's final plea unanswered, the crowd's cheers turning to doubts that gnawed at his soul. Garrick circled like a shadow, his blade drawn now, feigned loyalty crumbling into naked ambition. "See, my king, the Omega brings discord. The southern packs offer alliance, not this. Frailty. Strike her down, reclaim your strength, or watch your realm fracture." The southern alphas advanced, their boots thudding a war rhythm on the floor, pelts matted with the scent of border fires and fresh kills. One lunged at Thorn, axe swinging in a brutal arc, but he met it with a clash that sparked like stars dying in the night sky. Saris's gift surged instinctively, a luminous thread uncoiling from her core, weaving through the melee, not to conquer, but to soothe the frayed edges of rage. The enforcer's snarl softened to a gasp, his weapon lowering as bewilderment clouded his eyes. A southern warrior faltered mid-stride. Breath hitching like a beast, calmed at the water's edge. The air hummed with it, a subtle vibration that silenced the wilder howls rising from throats, turning fury to hesitation, as if the moon herself had exhaled forgiveness over the bloodied hall. Ilara recoiled, her face twisting in horror, the torchlight carving deep lines of denial into her weathered skin. "What sorcery is this? You mock the pack's law, girl, rejecting your blood for a tyrant's bed?" The accusation pierced deeper than any blade, stirring the ethical storm within Saris. Forgiveness or war? To extend her light to this woman who had forged her exile, or flee into the night, embracing the freedom of the forsaken? Love for Thorn was no blaze, but a slow ember, resisted in the rational corners of her mind. He was king, architect of fearsome justice, his guilt a crown heavier than any she could bear. Yet in his glance across the fray, storm-gray eyes locking with hers amid the swirl of cloaks and crimson, she saw the choice mirrored: stay and redeem, or let war consume them both, his throne crumbling under the weight of unhealed wounds. Garrick seized the moment, his dagger flashing toward Thorn's unguarded side, betrayal's edge honed by years of whispered plots. "For the true north," he hissed, the blade grazing the king's ribs, drawing a line of fire that bloomed red through his tunic. Thorn grunted, staggering but not falling, his free hand clamping Garrick's wrist in a vice of iron will. The advisor's eyes widened, the traitor's fear surfacing like blood in snow. But Saris moved then, her hand closing over Alara's arm. Not in violence, but a touch that channeled her gift's essence, warm as hearth embers against the woman's chilled rage. "Mother," she whispered, the word a bridge over the abyss. "The moon reveals, not curses. Let go the fear that bound us." Alara's breath caught, her body going rigid as the light pierced her defenses, unraveling the knots of resentment woven from lost mates and barren hunts. Tears carved tracks down her cheeks, hot and unbidden, the first crack in her armor. The enforcers dropped their weapons, kneeling in dazed submission. The Southern Alphas hesitated, axes lowering as the gift's calm rippled outward, banishing the nightmares of ambition and grudge. Garrick twisted free, fleeing toward the shadowed doors with a curse, his betrayal laid bare like a vein severed, pursued by Thorn's guards whose loyalty reignited in the hush. Thorn sank to one knee beside her, breath ragged, the wound's heat seeping through his fingers as he pressed against it. His free hand found hers, calluses rough against her palm, the contact a vow unspoken, love as daily choice, not conquest. "You chose mercy," he murmured, voice laced with the melancholy of revelation, his guilt fracturing further under her light's touch. The hall fell still, the fire's crackle the only sound, shadows retreating as moonlight streamed through the high windows, bathing them in silver absolution. Saris met Alara's gaze, the woman's eyes softening to something like regret, a tentative forgiveness blooming amid the pain, not erasure, but rebirth's fragile seed. Yet the cost lingered. Garrick's flight meant war's shadow lengthening, southern borders aflame with the traitor's allies, the pack's fractures demanding more than calm. Saris's chest tightened, the torn cloak stirring at her feet like a living thing, its mended threads glowing faintly in the lunar light, a symbol of unions forged from ruin. Freedom had been hers to claim, but staying demanded sacrifice. Weaving her pathfinder's grace into the throne's cold iron, choosing compassion over the wild's solitary embrace. Thorn's wound wept, a reminder that redemption's price was blood and choice. The moon, witnessing as love, resisted no longer, took root in the soil of their shared scars. What was power, if not the mercy to heal what it had broken? The moonlight cascaded through the shattered windows like a river of molten silver, pooling around the fallen blades and staining the flagstones with ethereal glow. Saris knelt beside Thorn, her hand still entwined with his, the warmth of her gift pulsing through their joined palms, a fragile conduit against the chill that seeped from his wound. Blood welled dark and steady from the gash Garrick had carved, soaking his tunic in crimson rivulets that traced the contours of his ribs like accusations from the throne's unforgiving code. The metallic tang filled her nostrils, sharp as the winter air beyond the walls, mingling with the hearth's dying embers and the faint, salty undercurrent of tears from those who had knelt in the hush. Alara stood transfixed a pace away, her enforcers slumped against the tapestries, their weapons discarded like shed illusions. The woman's face, etched by decades of unyielding scorn, softened under the lunar flood, her eyes, once daggers, now reflecting a dawning fracture, as if the moon had peeled back the layers of her rage to reveal the hollow beneath. "Saris," she whispered, the name a rasp born of thawing ice, her hand hovering uncertain, not in strike, but in tentative reach. The pack's law, that iron creed of blood ties and culls, crumbled in that moment, exposed as the fear it had always been. A mother's grief twisted into cruelty, barren hunts blamed on a daughter she could not understand. Saris's chest ached with the weight of it, the old wounds reopening not in pain, but in possibility. Forgiveness was no balm to erase the bruises mapped across her skin, the exiles forged in Alara's hearthside fury. It was a choice, raw and deliberate, to sever the chains without spilling more blood. "The curse was never mine," she said, her voice steady amid the hall's lingering echoes, threaded with the philosophy that had bloomed in the carriage's sway. "It was the fear you carried, Mother, the despair that blinded you to the light we both hid." She rose slowly, the torn cloak brushing her ankles like a whisper from the wild. Its mended seam, Thorn's dark thread woven into her rags, a symbol of fractures mended, not hidden. Thorn's breath hitched, his free hand pressing harder against the wound, fingers slick with his own lifeblood. The king's gray eyes, storm-tossed and weary, met hers, holding the depth of his guilt like a mirror to her own rebirth. He had ruled through fear's forge, executions like the dawn's axe, a testament to power's cost. But her gift had unraveled that veil, banishing the nightmares that clawed his sleep, visions of realms fractured by his unyielding justice. Now, as the southern alphas knelt in subdued silence, their aggression quelled to wary submission, he faced the ultimate judgment, not Garrick's blade, but the choice to let compassion redefine his crown. "Heal this," he murmured, not command but plea, guiding her hand to the gash. "Not for the throne, but for us, for the mercy I denied too long." Her gift responded, uncoiling like moonlight threading through veins, a warm surge that flowed from her fingertips into his flesh. The air hummed softly, the fire in the hearth flaring brighter as if fed by the exchange, casting golden flickers across the hall's assembled shadows. Pain lanced through Saris, a visceral echo of his wound, the cold fire of torn muscle, the sticky heat of spilling life, but she held, drawing on the reserve she had rationed through exiles and storms. The blood slowed, the edges of the cut knitting with an unnatural grace, leaving only a pale scar like the one on his temple, a mark of survival rather than conquest. Thorn exhaled, the tension easing from his frame, his body leaning into hers not as king to subject, but as equal in redemption's forge. Ilara stepped closer, her touch finally landing on Saris's shoulder, light, hesitant. The first unscarred contact in years. "I saw ruin in the blood moon's shadow," she confessed, voice breaking like frost under sun. "But you are its revelation. Forgive what I could not give." The words hung, a bridge over the abyss of rejection, not demanding absolution, but offering the seed of it. Saris nodded, tears tracing cold paths down her cheeks. The wind from the breached windows carrying away the last remnants of their shared despair. Freedom had tempted her at the hall's threshold, the wild's embrace, solitary and unclaimed. But this was rebirth, choosing union over isolation, weaving her pathfinder's light into the realm's fractured tapestry. The hall stirred then, nobles rising with murmurs of awe. The southern delegation exchanging glances laced with newfound respect rather than rivalry. Garrick's flight would summon war's distant thunder, borders aflame, packs rallying to traitors' calls, but in this silvered moment Thorn stood, drawing Saris to his side, his arm encircling her waist with a possessiveness born of choice, not decree. "The throne will bend to mercy's law," he declared to the assembly, his voice resonant as Weavos under the full moon, "for she has shown me the path beyond blood and blade." Love solidified here, not as mad impulse, but daily sacrament, resisted in rational fears, rationalized in duties clashing, now accepted as the fire that tempered power into compassion. Outside, the snow fell softer, blanketing the courtyard in hush, the moon's face full and forgiving above the spires. Saris felt the torn cloak stir at her feet, its fabric absorbing the lunar glow, transforming from relic of exile to mantle of destiny. Sacrifice had been made, not in death, but in yielding. Ilara's chains broken, Thorn's guilt cured through her light, their union a cure for the realm's despair. faith triumphed over doubt. Destiny claimed through liberty's bold step. In the quiet that followed, as servants tended the wounded and guards sealed the gates against the night, Ceres leaned into Thorn's warmth, the scent of pine and iron now laced with peace. What was strength, if not the heart's quiet roar, choosing healing where war once reigned? The flame of redemption burned eternal, a beacon against the winter's veil, drawing souls from shadow to silver light. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.